Hello, everyone, and welcome to Innovator's February Hot Topic, where today's topic is Metadata Management Basics. Our presenter today is Nannette Naught, who is a Senior Project Manager for Metadata at Innovative. At Innovative, she's focused on current and new generation metadata products and services for library. Nannette is a library technologist and knowledge economy strategist, which brings to us 20 years history with metadata-driven, discipline-transforming product decision support and content system development experience. Nannette has presented on assorted library metadata transformation topics. She has published in content technology and techniques, e-products, and other areas of development. Her current activities center on the metadata transformation required to empower state-of-the-art user experiences and knowledge enablement inside and outside of our library system. Nannette was formerly a consultant here at Innovative working on just this presentation, the hot topic. So some of you may remember Nannette when she was a part of the services team, which began taking our trainings beyond the ILS and into the day-to-day patron-facing work of the library. Nannette brings with her lessons learned as the consultant behind resource description and access, also known as RDA. She's worked in development and our work developing a new generation product that help our library partners drive library engagement and impact at their institution. Like all of our monthly sessions, Metadata Management Basics will focus on the key points of this in-demand skill. We're here to help you face your fears, ground you in the basic principles of the discipline as taught by an experienced, feet-on-the-ground expert who both practices the skills herself and teaches it to others. Today's our introductory session. Next week in session, in 2 weeks in session 2, we're going to move deeper into helping you outline a program of successful metadata transformation at your library. I'm joined today by my colleague, Bill, whose name I always muffle, and from here out, I'll just call him Bill T. Bill's going to serve as our chat moderator, and I am Ann Talley, and Bill and I both are senior consultants here at Innovative, and we will all hear from Nannette, our senior project manager, in just a moment. But before we begin, let's go ahead and put some faces on the voices that you're here. And we talk a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about why exactly we are here. So with metadata, our conversation and on metadata modernization, we want you to engage and participate in this conversation today. Chat your thoughts and questions to the panelists as they occur to you. Bill is sitting by, anxiously awaiting. He will pass your questions and comments on in the session as they occur. Chat your answers to Nannette questions in the chat panel. As mentioned today, and our whole discussion on metadata modernization is going to take place in 2 parts. Today, we're going to touch on the first 2 of debunking the myth of metadata, promises and prognostication versus reality, basic principles of metadata modernization, transforming our catalog. When we're together again on the 20th, we're going to talk about getting started with metadata modernization at your library and delve into setting a foundation for the future there at your library. So let's test our communication options. Most of you, as you were coming in, we asked you to chat where you were calling in from, and Bill, we had a lot of responses to that, and it seems that we have people coming in from around the world today. But now, also, for those of you who may have joined us later or who have not found the chat panel just yet, if you would, go ahead and chat a topic or a question that you brought with you today that you hope to get an opportunity to ask Nannette. Just like the conversation we were having during the presentation, these questions will try to be worked into the presentation. If not this week, definitely when we're together on the 20th. So, Bill, why don't you let us know where a couple of people are signing in while they're thinking of their questions to ask.
There is, we got joined by Lorinda from Columbus, Ohio, and Rachel from Orlando, and Martha from Massachusetts.
Yep. I think I saw some San Antonio people there check in with us, and we also have some colleagues from Europe, right?
Yes. We actually have our first question. Linda is asking, and I think this is actually in the presentation, but she's looking for follow-up articles or books to read on this topic.
Oh, yeah. Linda, you will not leave disappointed. We have that for you.
And Linda's from north central Wisconsin, which is kind of sort of where I am.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I see a couple of sign-ins from around the southeast. Bill, as he mentioned, is signing in from Wisconsin, and I live in Birmingham, Alabama. So we actually have, I think, a lot of participation both here in North America and, as I said, Europe. And again, welcome our European colleagues. So why is innovative investing in these hot topics, and specifically, why are we doing a topic on metadata modernization? This topic, which is presented by Nannette Naught, as we just mentioned, is one of the series, one of our monthly series. And we have flashed on your screen a quote that may look dated because it came about and it was presented in 2007. But for this topic and why we're doing this, I'd like to just sort of paraphrase a quote from our Senior Vice President of Product Strategy, Catherine Harnish, where she says the times are a-changing. And so back in 2007, when this quote was first presented, in the changing roles of academic and research library. This may seem dated, but of course this is extremely relevant today, and it is exactly why we are here and why you all have joined us. So metadata management basics is going to focus on this particular scale. It's going to present us with ideas and thoughts on how we can move our library forward. If you have not taken the time in Innovative, it's invested in the Beyond the Library series, and so you can take the time to check out our other offerings where we bring to you skill sets that the librarians can use. So, with that said, and with that slight commercial break about our other hot topics, I'm going to turn things over to Nannette.
Well, hello, everyone. In development, which is where I reside these days, we have a saying, what's the T-shirt? For many years, this T-shirt that you see here on the right has said it all for me. Metadata is a love note to the future. It's information in and beyond the content. It's helpful context, if you will, that we as metadata geeks, catalogers and librarians, create, collect, and record in the hopes that it will be usable by us and others in our systems and in our measurement techniques and daily work to help us drive learning, inquiry, and research forward. And we want to drive them these days, as the quote that Anne had suggests, forward, farther, and faster. And in the process, then, we hope to demonstrate the impact and value of our libraries on student and patron success, literacy, digital literacy, which is another one of our hot topics, so shameless plug, and the difference between the two. Business value and all of the other goods of library and librarianship. The things that drew us to this profession and keep us in it day to day. Or, as Catherine, the SVP of product strategy that Anne quoted would say, that's why we became librarians. And ideally, if we interpret these love notes, our metadata, from the past right, and by right I mean in extensible, measurable, and demonstrable ways, they'll provide us with a pathway to library visibility and viability, both now and into the future. And speaking of love notes from the past, I just want to start this session out by saying that library has been writing love notes to its future in machine parsable, if not machine actionable way, since 1967 with the invention and ubiquitous use of MARC, in which we've been encoding the details of knowledge enablement internationally. It's like a dictionary and a finding aid to our collections and the knowledge that we supply to our users and patrons. Basically, I'm talking about the library catalog with all its connections to other library catalogs that have been around since the inception of the automated cart catalog in OPACs. But before we talk about reading those love notes in new ways, or library metadata modernization, which is a mouthful, actually, once I say it out loud, I wanted to ground our conversation today in just a bit of context. First, a bit about me. I am a self-acknowledged metadata geek with a need for speed. I came out of the box that way, prone to asking why and how, and determined to move forward into the new as quickly and economically as possible. I'm a mission, vision, and value-oriented metadata evangelist, which is a somewhat long-winded way to say I'm all about economical, evidence-based metadata. So I guess you could say I'm not just the just-in-case girl, I'm the just-in-time girl. We want economical, evidence-based metadata whenever and wherever possible. And on a personal note, I'm a lifelong reader and volunteer who, despite running fast in development life, loves, as these pictures show, to work with animals and kids. They bring me balance and connection and remind me that there's more to life than metadata. And as the pictures show, I live in eastern Washington State, not Seattle, on the other side of the mountains, the Cascades, if you will, which, as these pictures show, looks a lot like Montana in spots. My recent work centers around workflow reinvention and metadata mining required to realize the promises of all those love notes we've left to the past, our past has left to our future, and my mentors like Glenn Patton, Barbara Tillett, Tom Delsey, and June Abbott. But enough about me. Let's talk about catalogs for a minute. What are catalogs? Catalogs are about knowledge organization, or said another way, systematically arranged enumerations of available items with descriptive details. They're mission, vision, and value-oriented finding aids for the collections we have and that we supply to our end users, which is, again, a somewhat long-winded way to say they're about economical, evidence-based directories to the products, services, and experiences delivered by our organizations, companies, and institutions. They're also historical records of the resources, including product, services, and experience, that our organizations, companies, and institutions assemble for and offer to our constituencies, be those constituencies customers, patrons, end users, or otherwise. And as such, these catalogs are the property of their organization, company, and institution or library. They are under the ownership and control of these entities, and they usually reside at their locations. They're offered to us or distributed to us on site, through the mail, and over the internet. I forgot to change my heading. Recent incarnations of catalogs that you see on a regular basis include sales catalogs, which are focused on direct sales, as well as post-experience follow-ups, purchase reminders, and sales workflow streamlining that ideally reduces the catalog producer's cost of sale. That's what those publishers are doing, right, with the resource catalogs we select and obtain our resources from. Library catalogs are focused not on sales, but on directing the user to the correct shelf location or the online access point as a way to speed the access of our patrons and as a way to save time, hopefully, for both our end user and a librarian. They're lists of known items that direct individuals to the delivery mechanisms and the location to get them. And then there's person catalogs or directories, focused on directing individuals to one another through names and numbers, addresses, and locations, as well as cross-references, which actually sounds a lot like a phone book and library authorities. And finally, there's the online catalog. It's any and all of the above pushed onto the web to increase visibility and reach our users where they are, amidst their daily digital lives, and hopefully in a way that increases our relevance rankings in the search engines that they find there and the social spaces that they live in online, which should increase our traffic, both foot and click, and our funding or viability. With this background then, let's head into today's topic, metadata modernization, and debunk a few myths. Starting again with the t-shirt. I did say I'm a developer. This one seems appropriate to me. This isn't just about a mythical character which exists in our heads. It's also about the tendency, at least in development within certain circles, to see something cool that someone else has done and make a product, and make that your product. The hype cycle, if you will, which now that we're past that in the linked data development and metadata modernization and on to uptake, we want to dispel today if we can. Or said another way, we want to debunk the myths of metadata modernization, mostly today by injecting reality into the promises and prognostications we've seen to date to enable us to get where we want to go, where our users need us to go, farther, faster, and together. So let's start with an old favorite of catalogers, the myth that MARC must die. As famously stated by Roy Tennant in the Library Journal, showed here, and there's a link provided, as there will be on all the slides. So hopefully we're getting to the resources that you're looking for. There will be more in this session and in the second session. This happened in 2007, less than a year after AACR3 became known as RDA, and the developing bodies decided it was a proof point for WEMI, work, expression, manifestation, and item, or Group 1 fervor. Or maybe you didn't hear this myth through Roy's presentation. Maybe you heard it at Marby, where folks like Diane Hillman stated that continuing to work on MARC is like arranging deck chairs on the Titanic. She implied that we could already see the iceberg headed for us and that we needed to change. But alas, the reality is, in Roy's own words shown here, on his OCLC Hanging Together blog post, 15 years later, MARC didn't die, and it isn't dead yet. In fact, MARC is still here and going strong, even in the era of BibFrame. And BibFrame's been around 6 years now, since 2012. MARC, despite all the dire predictions and prognostications, is still around. It's still running our systems and our information and metadata exchanges. In many ways, as it always has. Sure, we've added a few new doohickeys, if you will, to make it look a bit more modern, like linked data publishing, and recently, the subfield 0 URI parking lot for persistent identifiers, which we'll see is important here in a few minutes. But Roy's original points still remain relevant, if not more so now than then. In many ways, MARC is holding us back. It is, after all, an old carrier in the modern world. 1967? OCLC 1972? What else in computer science has lasted this long? Just stop and think for a moment about what the computers MARC was created to run on look like. Think about how we fed them. I don't know about you, but I haven't used a punch card in a long time. Think about the rooms that these computers took up to run these programs, and how non-portable they were. It's pretty safe to say that back in the late 60s and early 70s, few of our patrons, few of our users were living digitally enabled lives. But due to a myriad of reasons, few more than compelling than our risk-averse natures and the inertia caused by long-term standards that we have invested millions and millions in, MARC isn't dead yet. That's the reality. Though some would argue that maybe it should be. Not just because of all of those pretty easy to draw pictures in your head, but because it is, after all, the heart of our systems. And it's starting, as this slide suggests, to suffer from circulatory and perfusion problems caused by its slow and increasingly irregular heartbeat. Indeed, as one blogger notes, and I'm going to quote him in his the links are at the bottom of the page here. MARC isn't dead, but it is a dead end. We know that MARC isn't dead. The communications format, along with its AACR2 companion rules for describing bibliographic resources, are deeply and daily ingrained in our system and processes. For the same reasons, this blogger thinks it's fair to say that MARC isn't dying. He does note, and it's aside, this article is a few years old, but it's still pertinent, that the fate of AACR2 with respect to RDA may be a little closer to the edge. What he proposes, though, is that MARC is a dead end. And here he quotes Karen Coyle, who makes the comment on the brokenness of MARC. And the link at the bottom of the page gives you the full stories and all of the links to Karen's work. This brokenness of MARC starts to enumerate some of the basic issues with the MARC format. In fact, Karen's writings from more than 10 years ago now list even more details if you'd like to go into it, and that's where I suggest the story starts. And also, as Karen pointed out in her presentations, and many others have done before and after her, MARC is a format that's only used in the library community. As a communications format, it's cumbersome, requiring those outside the library community to use custom code toolkits to read and write the format. And in my injection here into his quote, that's expensive. And expense is an issue for us in library. And he goes on to state that MARC's a pretty high barrier for the wider world to want to use our library bibliographic data because it's encoding in MARC, which leads many to conclude, as you see on this slide, and this is a researched article, again, that I gave you the link to, that MARC isn't being replaced fast enough. It's not dying fast enough to help libraries drive the modern user experiences they need with the speed and proficiency required to meet the needs of knowledge enablement and our users, both in the public and academic space today. For more on those thoughts, I do suggest, as I have throughout this slide, that you check out the links on the bottom here. They are applicable to metadata modernization, and that they tell a story that we'll pick up in a few slides that brings in the web. Karen Coyle happens to be someone I was lucky enough to encounter early in my library metadata journey, and she's my chosen MARC historian to explain how we got here through RDA up until now. She really relates things in a way that I can understand and acts as a springboard to move forward. To be honest, I find her very transparent, clear, and to the point. Her work is quite accessible and explains both the value and the problems of the catalog as we find it today. But let's stop here before summing up the high points of our first myth, that MARC is dead, but not really, to see if anybody has any questions or thoughts about what we've talked about so far.
Hi, Nannette. This is a question from earlier from Beth. I think it kind of ties in here. She asked, how will our catalog change as we incorporate elements of linked data?
Oh, well, I'm actually going to get to that today in the end. I think it's going to get but I will suggest, I'll give a little preview. I think it's going to get faster and more precise in a way that helps us drive traffic and visibility.
And another question from Eva. What will we need to have in place for the new discovery layer that will replace Encore?
Oh, great question. I'm going to show you that in just a few minutes as we get into our next slide.
Okay. That was about it for right now, so far.
All right. Maybe I'll keep going. It's good to know that I'm bringing you the pieces that you want. So let's go back to the slowing heartbeat issues for just a second and talk about what exactly in MARC is causing our slowdown, which also starts to hint at the answer to Eva's question of what are the types of things we need to think about. So right now, what's slowing us down in our systems? Why is the heartbeat slow? Two things, really. Clutter. And by clutter, I guess the biggest part is duplicates. They're increasing. We all know that. Also, we lack IDs, or identifiers, which goes to point two. Beyond the clutter, there's an inability to interoperate with modern computing standards, which is important out on the web, but it's also important internal to our systems as we work with the learning management systems in our academic institutions and the devices that our patrons in public library bring in and want to view our resources on. Those modern computing standards and the electronic product sales chain, MARC's missing some pieces, some parts and pieces of their modern encoding standards. And the most fundamental of these is persistent identifiers with corresponding human non-secret cataloging language, right? You don't have to be inculcated to know what these labels mean at all levels. So if this is a title, instead of setting the MARC field number or the subfield for that. And why do we need these persistent identifiers at that level, at the record level, at the phrase level, and by version or audit and language at each of those levels? We need them to avoid what's happening in our aggregations today, our local and our union catalogs, as well as the larger aggregations that we copy catalog from. Without them, we're having overlap, overwrite, and collision of records. That's slowing down our work as well as our systems. And it's not giving us the precision that we need to get users to the right item when they ask for it, let alone show them what are available today, now, based on their question. And as I said, these numbers also allow us versioning and audit trails, and they allow us to repeatedly access and recall the precise bits of information that we need at a defined location at a given time. There's your speed question. When we can do that, we can go back to the same information again and again in different contexts as our users need it based on the resources they want and the devices that they're working on. Without these identifiers, without being able to do this, we're essentially asking our systems to recall a book from the shelf when the book has no call number and the specific copy that we want, perhaps the one we left our prized bookmark in, has no RFID tag. Without those identifiers, the system doesn't know where to go, and it slows it down as it has to look. And then finally, there's this last bullet here on our slowdown problem. It's the issue of form and format divergence. The forms and formats of resources that MARC records and supplies to our ILSs, our discovery applications, linked data, the LMSs that we integrate don't match the forms and formats others understand. They don't match the forms and formats our users, students, faculty, and patrons think or speak. And they don't match the forms and formats our suppliers, the publishers, aggregators, distributors, Amazon, and other places that we get our resources from, think or speak. And there's no straightforward conversion from MARC to the formats that our users and our suppliers think and speak. Which gets to that next question. Somebody asked about what will it look like in an encore replacement. Well, here it is. So to illustrate these points, I want us to look no further than carrier type versus the forms and formats that our users want to see. On the left is the MARC vocabulary. On the right is an excerpt from our current process at III, the next generation discovery development. And I'll stop and do a shameless plug. If you'd like to see more, we have a clickable prototype. We're doing focus groups. We're actively out soliciting your feedback. Catherine and our new Senior Product Manager for Discovery, Erin Daba, will be at Midwinter. They will be holding focus groups. Stop by and look for them. You can see more. We'll be at IUG. We'll be doing sessions like this and others to get your feedback into place. I do want to give Erin a bit of a plug. Like myself, he is a library technologist with both library and industry experience, because that's what we're trying to do here, right? Bridge those gaps for you as we move beyond MARC. In Erin's case, some of you may know him. He has been at Innovative before as a customer and as a support person. He's also had public library experience in New York, and most recently he came to us with telecommunications knowledge and digital navigation. It's a bit of a digression, but I really do want to show you what we as your partner are trying to bring to this so that we have the right skills, yours and ours, together, and as we'll see later in this presentation, to bring the right partnership to get us all to the future farther, faster, together. But let's get back to the MARC story. It's easy to see here that the storing forms and formats over there in MARC as carrier type, which is just one of the fields needed, of course, to do the display that you see on the right in MARC. These terms are even their number equivalent. When we translate them to what we display, is at best cumbersome, slow, and costly. And as you look at it, and you can see that it might even be hard to get from there. Oops, I'm on the wrong screen, sorry. From there to here. Because it's almost like going from black and white to full color. It's like our old systems are silent movies, and we're going to go straight to feature films in one jump. That's sort of the why of metadata modernization, whether we're looking to publish online and be visible, or whether we're in our own catalog, in our own spaces, trying to reach the users at our institution or in our community through the digital devices that they work with daily. And this simple illustration also sets aside the workflow issue, but I do want to mention it because a bunch of cost comes in there. We regularly strip out a lot of this information that we need on the right that's coming in through our selection and acquisition processes, be they EDI or Onyx driven. Amazon's, of course, using this. You can see this display looks a lot more like what you might see in Amazon simplified. So we're stripping those out as they come in to put them in MARC, to store them that way, to supply them to a system that does what we see on the right. You can start to just think through that a little bit. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of time lost that we could be doing other patron-facing activities. And as we know when we look at our information and our discovery interfaces, there's a lot of error introduced in that rework. So not only is it slow for those reasons, it also requires, as I just hinted at, a lot of manual labor to keep it going. Like Superman here, MARC's long-lived and strong. We learned that in our first math. But even the strongest start to suffer performance problems that don't result in increases in survival or finding rate. And this graphic actually happens to be from a CPR class about chest compression rate. And it notes that if you push too hard and apply too much force, you start to see diminishing returns and performance problems arise. And what's more, as with manual chest compressions, manual labor introduces a lot of noise into the process. Not only is record creation, aggregation, and supply cumbersome, it requires downgrading of the information due to the aforementioned lack of persistent identifiers and audit trails, right? The overriding process of MARC in our aggregations and the deleting process of records that we do to keep our systems running efficiently today is getting rid of parts of our love notes or even whole records, which is causing loss of intelligence and analytics. And much of that carefully and expensively curated content that we're working so hard to create, collect, and record in our cataloging and metadata enhancement workflows today. If you need an example, let's think about additions or box sets or any other collected works and how they appear in our OPACs and discovery interfaces today. Often, they come out as an undifferentiated set where relevancy ranking doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We see them clumped together. We work hard not to clump them together. And we need to ask ourselves, is this because of the technology? Is it because we don't know the difference? Clearly we know the difference. It's one of the things library specializes in. Or is it because all the intelligence we're working so hard to surface through our systems gets lost, smashed out, if you will, with a loss of quality and specificity, downgraded, pushed out into parallel records as we put it into MARC and in our workflows of today. And I'll pause here. I don't have an official question slide, but I feel like I've said a lot very quickly, and I want to see if I'm addressing folks' questions or if others have arisen.
Nannette, this is
just had a go ahead, Anthony.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just going to bring in, Ava had posed the question earlier when you were talking about the URIs and the MARC records, in particular subfield 0, and the labor that's involved because of their introduction into the records that they're getting, either via Z39.50 or maybe even for some vendor supplied types of records. And it is the Sierra-specific question, and I know in our platform-neutral hot topics we don't get that deeply into systems, but it is a very good question because I think it illustrates what you were just pointing out about some of the labor intensity that supporting MARC brings to the table. And so I just wanted Ava to know that Innovative is aware of this and agrees that this needs to be addressed. But it ties in, and I think it's a very good example of what you were just pointing out. And I'm sorry.
It's actually I'll add, it's actually the example, Eva and Ann, that's in my head right now, because that was a decision to pass those through in bibliographic records was made by the PCC last year, and we're starting to see them in the supply. You're correct. And we have added labor either to strip them out because we don't want them in our catalogs, or to put them back in after our ILS strips them out because it's a MARC change at a time that we're getting few MARC changes. And what I want to let everyone on the phone know is, yes, we see this. Yes, we understand they're persistent identifiers, and we are indeed working on it. It's high on our list as one of those places that our next generation systems have to interoperate with our existing systems over time as it all moves forward, and we need to do so in an economical way with the least hand edit and rework possible. So if you want to know more, feel free to contact me. That's a piece I'm actively working on right now.
Yeah, I think that that's how they can participate in the focus groups. Who should they contact? Is that you?
Yeah, if you want to send me a note, I'm happy to get you, Eva, into the focus groups that that Catherine and Aaron are doing. They are small one-on-one sessions to get you a chance to react to what we've been working on these past few months. I'll also plug, if folks want to know more, on our website there is Catherine's strategy session that she did, I think in December, about context and how we see context playing out. And while I have it later in the presentation, I'll say it now. I was just with all of our account reps last week, and I know that they're working on, and sales engineers, and they're working on bringing this information to you. So you should feel perfectly comfortable to place a call to them as well. I'm sure they'd be happy to help, and they just sat in a week of training to get ready to help you. So.
And just a little follow-up from Eva. I guess she's looking for a little more detail on what they need to get ready for new discovery labor. Do we need to have linked data, bib frame? Just in general, how can they be ready for this new discovery layer when it comes?
I have the basic points today about basic principles, and we point out some more of the myths. And then in 2 weeks, I hope to have a much more stepwise fashion so we can start to plan for the future, which I know isn't a direct answer, but at least it's on a schedule that we'll be quickly delivering it your way.
That's all I see right now.
Okay. Well, maybe then I'll jump right back into this. Let me check to see how I'm doing on time here. It seems like since it is February after all, I had to take a little moment, come back to a T-shirt about the Library Geek metadata and how much we love our MARC. And though MARC's a bit beat up at this point and suffering from the heart problems we've been talking about, we still love her. And we don't want to forget our T-shirt. And so basically what I'm saying is that we library metadata geeks, despite all the trash talk of the past 15 years, if you follow the first myth or slides, we love our MARC. And as the nurses would say, from its aorta to its apex, we love it with our whole heart. And if we're going to transform and finally put our aging heart to rest and realize better circulation in our systems, we first do have to acknowledge some simple facts about this love. MARC is both a metadata carrier and a metadata religion. And I chose that word very specifically. To move forward faster together, we do have to lose the religion. And part of that includes we need to stop making a case that our controlled fields and vocabularies, like carrier type, work in an ONNX-driven modern distribution flow we saw a few slides back. And let's be honest, that distribution flow, those interfaces like Amazon have already won our patrons' hearts and minds, and frankly, their devices. To move forward faster, we have to give up our lists and use theirs. Not just to save money, but to give everyone access to the really valuable part of MARC, those metadata love notes, those notes fields that we've been recording all that time. Stop, if you will, and think about what's there and all the good stuff we knew was important to knowledge enablement journeys, to helping our patrons find the right thing at the right time. but that we couldn't force into a controlled vocabulary. One of my favorites is music. Every song on most every CD or record, the composer, the creator, the instruments used, all of that's there, trapped right now in notes fields. And I'm sure that you who work in MARC can think of other things. So I wanted to stop for a moment and chat about what's trapped in your notes fields. What's just screaming to get out that you know is there that you think would help your users or would help you manage your workflows, would help your patrons find what they're looking for more efficiently and effectively, would help your learners explore the knowledge landscape in a new way, be they K-12 and community learners, digital literacy experiences in your community or in your local public libraries, or be they student success rates in your academic libraries. And as you start to think about that, the next question I'll ask you, even more than that, what else have you been storing? What other love notes have you been storing in a sneaker net of Excel files to get around your MARC system? And while I can't see you or laugh or hear you laugh, I hope there's some smirks, and I hope, you know, there's just a little twinkle in people's eyes, because the first thing I hear as a library technologist when I place a call is, oh yeah, and we hold all this other information that would be really helpful to what we're trying to do in the library outside our catalog in an Excel file that we export some identifiers, string identifiers from the catalog to maintain. So with that, I'll pause and see if anyone has any points or use cases or pieces of information that are trapped that they've been thinking about, that they want to make sure we bring into the conversation. Bill?
I haven't seen anything come through yet.
Well, I will let folks keep thinking about it then and keep moving on to keep us on time. This theme will come up again and again, I promise. So before we leave the heart and the love theme, I want to make one last point just in case it wasn't clear about our aging metadata circulatory system known as MARC. Thankfully, as the nurses say, mistakes have been made in the transplant process of moving that 1967 original to its current state in a late 1990s, early 2000s relational database management system, which is where we stand today. And I say thankfully because while mistakes have been made, we're skilled enough as librarians and library technologists to restart it. And as I promised a few slides back, this also brings us to my favorite cataloging historian's line of reasoning. And I've embedded it here as Karen Coyle's talk at the 2015 Semantic Web Conference, when she talked about the mistakes that were made making the catalog electronic. Mistakes that we made not because we loved our MARC too much or our archaic terms and secret language, not just because we librarians and system vendors are a risk-averse, cost-adverse group with millions invested in MARC, not because we were simpletons who didn't understand what we had in our knowledge enablement catalog, but rather because we were flummoxed. Our catalogs already did more than these relational databases. In fact, in many ways, it's the variant and misparsed MARC in our relational databases today that oversimplified the catalog to one-to-one and one-to-many relationships that were never present in our original love notes before MARC was database, that are the source of our speed and precision problems today. They're a large part of the downgrading because, as Karen points out here, and I do suggest you listen, it connects all of the what's wrong with MARC to the what do we need moving forward and starts to address some of the questions that are coming up today in a way that, frankly, I think is better than my own. She's patient. She explains it all in very librarian terms from her experience. But my takeaway from that is this all happened because we knew that MARC was simply a workable and, at the time, very cost-efficient parking lot for the intellectual utility that the adolescent digital world we were working in was not yet ready to make use of without downgrading it and pushing the meaning out of it. Basically what Karen is saying is that we, as catalogers, didn't go into relational databases on purpose because we did all the mapping and knew that it made MARC less than it is. It made it more efficient for inventory control, but it lost all of that context. Or it didn't lose it. It may have parked it in a note field that we can't get access to today actively in our system. And I did start this by saying that it might not be machine actionable, but it's machine parsable. It's still sitting there. We just haven't made use of it enough, or yet. And certainly, as I said earlier, there's a lot more detail and background than I can present in our time together today. And I recommend, again, that you take time to view Karen's full presentation and her earlier writings. I'll note there's also some writings on our blog that that link you to the purpose of metadata and the purpose of those love notes to the future, as she's talked about them, and metadata for human use. But I'll pause here and just explicitly bust the myth that MARC is the problem because it's not fit for purpose. If you listen to the COIL presentation, you'll see that MARC was fit for the purpose. It was just misread and misinterpreted as an RDBMS model when it was a more flexible model all along, a model that was more intuitive to people and more amenable to objects than the database allowed us to show. It was never intended to be a database. And Karen cites some really interesting work in her presentation on how teams then proved it, as well as what the purpose was that goes beyond our relational databases, a purpose, as she presents in 2015, that we're finally ready for today. And the reality then that MARC is more than encoding. It's a carrier of context, a language, if you will, the language of knowledge enablement, of library metadata, that, like any language, is a carrier of culture, library culture, learning, literacy, research, and inquiry culture. It's all there. If you think about it, it even has, like any language, its own connotations, denotations, and euphemisms. Just like this little cartoon, if we interrelate our MARC in different ways and free it, we know that in certain areas, dead isn't sleeping. Because in MARC and in our union catalogs and across the standards that have been used by libraries over time internationally, we're lucky enough to have many languages interrelated and many national libraries who've been working together to write love notes to our future in interrelated, coordinated ways, right? That's what the bibliographic record's all about. Think about national bibliographies and the cataloging policies we all use and authorities. These are interrelated and connected, these are coordinated interrelationships across decades. Our contexts are interrelatable and parsable as part of our transformation process, which is at the heart of modernization. And I want to note that Amazon and other types of catalogs we started with as the background context of today don't have any of this. They need ours. So if we want to talk about realizing value, there's a love note to the future that brings a treasure with it. Which brings me then to the next set of questions. As you start to think about these things, what new possibilities does thinking about MARC in this way, and I know that this is a short time period, you might want to go back and listen to Karen and bring those up for the next session in the next 2 weeks, and that's fine. You can send us an email. But what new possibilities does thinking about MARC in this way, as an open door to the future, allow us to see that we might not have seen before when we were just thinking about using it in our inventory systems? Looks like we've got a quiet group, Bill and Ann. I'm either overwhelming folks or I'm running too slow or people are just thinking.
I think they're thinking. That last question was pretty deep, as was that previous discussion about MARC. So I'm glad you mentioned that they will have the opportunity to bring their thoughts and questions back, particularly on this topic. That was a lot. That was a lot. A lot of things.
I tend to. Okay, I will jump ahead, and if there's others that come in, we'll address them then. So, right, the next myth: if MARC is the problem, then I think we've all been told that RDA is the answer. Or said another way, RDA paired with BibFrame and the library reference model, which IFLA just approved, frees us from the speed and performance problems of our aging standard known as MARC. That's the myth. I think the reality is that RDA is part of a larger solution, one that starts to step outside the boundaries of our library silo, which we needed, and address some of the challenges of MARC and past standards. But to be honest, it carries with it a bit too much of the past and a bit too much of our silo. To explore this further, let's consider a few basics, places that there's been much commentary and where the reality is headed for metadata transformation. And I'm going to use the math instead of the heart and the circulatory system as our metaphor this time. So if we look at resource description and access, RDA, the first R equals resource. But if you look at RDA, as it stands today, WEMI, work expression manifestation, is underneath it. Resources are much bigger than books, right? We have to talk about music and events and rooms and equipment. I mean, let's be honest, many libraries circulate more equipment today, cords, chargers, readers, computers, than they do actual books. It's the way people access their collection, and it brings people into the library when they went to campus or they went downtown where the public library is and forgot their charger. We also catalog rocks and other non-book-like physical items that are used in the learning process and in inquiry and knowledge enablement. Resources can include maker spaces. San Jose Public Library has a whole bus that it takes out. My public library, Spokane, has a whole business makerspace incubator that provides access to all kinds of materials and equipment and experts that I might need to start my business or to grow my business that I simply can't afford alone. Resources include video and software, and very important when in the K-12 and public environments, augmented and virtual reality. They include special collections, ebooks, databases, and other digital repositories, which, oh, you can't see, which just brings me to the next part about resource, which I forgot. So if resources are bigger than books, they're also bigger than WEMI. WEMI doesn't equal speed, precision, or performance. There's many groups that have proven that as they broke up our records into 4 different records and just had more processing instructions. It didn't get us a significant enough gain over MARC to drive the needed user experience. So it doesn't have precision at speed, it doesn't have diversity, and it has some uncomfortable questions. I ask you as you look at it, what's an expression? Do we all agree, and can we all record that economically and with enough consistency that our records will interoperate in the way that we need them to in a consortia or in a multi-branch library? Does it match the life cycle outside the library that we talked about in the MARC session? Can you map WEMI to the distribution of that page that we had where users wanted to see what we could get, our new results page, if you will, in Discovery interfaces? And are any of the distinctions, or many of the distinctions that we're taking a lot of time to talk about and record in RDA, important to our end users? Do those distinctions help them? Do they help us meet their knowledge enablement use cases in their increasingly digital world? Or do they just add cost and opacity? And I said at the beginning, I'm an evidence-based metadata evangelist. Folks are asking, what do we need to move forward? Honestly, we need to start asking questions like this of our data and our tools and the ways that we modernize it, because we need to spend our money in the place to take us forward farther and faster together, and not just where the standards tell us to go. And that's a new effort for us. Towards that end, I want to say one last thing about resource. BibFrame does bring us something wonderful that maybe RDA doesn't realize yet, but we hope that it will in that redo or rework that we all know is coming out. I think they adjusted the date again sometime this year or by the end of the year. And I want to talk a little bit about BibFrame and linked data prep as it's being implemented by the Library of Congress now in version 2.0. And I would suggest as you're looking at your resources about linked data and about BibFrame, only look at this stuff from the last year, from BibFrame 2.0. The other stuff is confusing, and I actually heard Kirk Hess, who is leading the initiative, the technology part of the initiative at the Library of Congress, make this statement in a small group at DCMI this year. So I want to broadcast that out. If the Library of Congress is telling us to pay attention to what they're doing now, to the millions of records they have in this new format, let's not worry about plowing through all the old stuff. Let's start where they are, where the speed and performance gains are. And let's look at that in a way that matches the knowledge creation and distribution lifecycle natively. You won't see this written up in their pieces, but it's a way that I've started talking about it that I wanted to share with you. What if we looked at work, not as a Ferber work, but more like we would look at it in music? What if we looked at knowledge, the creation of an article or a novel that we distribute as a performance, just one act of the human mind, instead of a creative work as we see it in Ferber? What if we considered work a conceptual essence of the knowledge that exists in the creator's and learner's mind? Instead of trying to record it, we thought of it as derived pieces from the other information that we collect and create in our love notes. And what if we thought of instance, and here I'm using very object-y terms and very BibFrame terms, what if we thought of instance as the instantiation of that knowledge from the creator or learner into a resource? That thing that's the material embodiment of knowledge that we share, distribute, collect. And what if we thought of item as an actual copy of an instance? So work is something in our minds. Instance is the moment it's reduced to something that we can share. That's when copyright happens. So we're following not just the money, but the law. And then we distribute items of instances. I know I'm throwing a lot at you fast, and I'm reintroducing this, and I'm looking at BibFrame in a new way. But as we look at metadata modernization, what if we could simplify and match the way modern systems run? Then we could liberate those things we were thinking about in the MARC piece into something that interoperates natively and is extensible as all these other things develop. So I just want to state that in talking about this, you'll hear it next week, you'll probably hear it interspersed today. Moving forward farther, faster together, to anybody who's heard me speak before, especially about metadata, means in an evidence-based world, and in my simple mind, following the money and following the law. The law is intellectual property and distribution. That's what we create, collect, and curate in libraries. And the money is the distribution cycle and our end users picking it up, which, if we are of service, leads to more funding for our libraries. So maybe that's a bit simple, but that's what I think resources are and how I think we can simplify the process and keep meaning in our metadata as we liberate it from MARC and move forward. And I'll pause to see if there's any questions or if I've just thrown you all off the deep end.
I think you really got people thinking that.
Yeah, well, folks want, I mean, so what's the mindset change? I guess what I'm saying is, yes, you've learned Ferber. This is easier. You know, just trying to give folks a mental model to think about our love notes in a simple way that allows us to drive accurate systems very fast. So let's go to the second, right? So if we had resource was the first thing of RDA, access, right? Or description is the next, sorry. And description is about is a question of usability, diversity, extent, and context in my world. Currently, our descriptions, like the right side of this slide in MARC, and RDA descriptions are still in MARC, are simply too small. They're very siloed, and they're circumscribed to meet the needs of our catalogs, not the needs and use cases of our end users. Look at the left side of this slide, right? Those are the descriptions our users are using. Amazon, movies, iTunes, Tinder. And then I want library and library consortia descriptions to be here, acknowledging that they're not in the MARC. Some of them are there. A lot of them are kept in other places, and a lot of them are in librarians' heads. So as we look at that liberation, I want to get the librarian head stuff in here as well. And I think the interesting piece here is Tinder. I didn't know what it was because I'm an old married lady who met my husband before dating sites. So at DCMI this year, I heard a very interesting paper, and what we see our new MLIS grads and PhD students researching are the tools and the metadata associated with the tools that our users use every day. Tinder, a dating site, is one of them, and they're subjecting them to the methods that we use to study metadata in an evidence-based way. The interesting part about Tinder to me was the description that you see in Tinder is integrated with Instagram, so the photos come from Instagram. Our descriptions aren't integrated yet, but wouldn't it be nice if they were better integrated in all those pictures that we want to see in our discovery interface? And all the colors and all of that diversity was available. They're really ours. We just need to, like Tinder, borrow them from someplace. The other thing about Tinder that was really, then the studies there that really interested me is swipe left. I didn't know this, again, old lady, but when you swipe left, that means you're discarding something. You're actually taking a physical action instead of clicking a link and putting it in the not pile. That action is ingrained in many of our four-year students. And I thought, boy, that doesn't apply to me because I'm an old lady. And then I thought, you know what I do every day for work? I have 2 iPhones, an iPad, and a Mac. I don't swipe left, but I do pretty close. Up and off the top is delete. Oh, right, straight across in Outlook is delete. I do it with my mouse, I do it with my finger, I do it with the arrows on my keyboard every day. It's almost the same as putting a pencil in my hand and writing, and it's a Boolean operator not. Think about what those actions against these type of descriptions with the information we have could do if we were focused on that kind of a description and that kind of an interrelationship. So whether we're inside our silo or serving the needs of our patrons who travel all over, not just to the library, and who use all kinds of devices, not just the ones they find in our library, or whether we're broadcasting through link data and publishing out on the web to draw more in, all of these things are relevant to description. And as we modernize our metadata, we talk about those things that were wrong with MARC. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get our descriptions and our words to better match, without added cost, those of our suppliers and our users. And in my opinion, obviously, RDA doesn't go far enough this way. It starts the journey as it talks about integrating with other publishing standards, but it just doesn't go far enough to meet our users where they are today. So finally, the last part of RDA is access. And I just have a couple points to point out about access. RDA talks a lot about access points and strings. And it doesn't demand or require that we use those persistent identifiers. I can't tell you how many times I personally have been on the stage and been pushed about this. I was just the consultant. I don't write the rules. Those are library rules. Did I know from a technology reason that it needed to be numbers? Yes. Did I build the system behind it that was used until recently with numbers at those levels? Yes. Does it drive your user experience in using that tool? Yes. Did it make it into the standard? No, that wasn't my job. We didn't know. We were still learning. And access points still have value. We see them moved forward. But access is more than an access point. As we all know, access is greater than the KBs of today and URL provision. We need them. They're essential to what we do, but access is more than that. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have so many complaints at the desk about what folks can't access, or worse yet, didn't even know they had access to. Access is really about knowledge enablement in context with priority pimping. We already do this a little bit, right? I know, kind of a silly term, but we want to set what users of certain types in our library see in an order that they can see it that's meaningful to them. That's a big deal. We know that. We sit at the reference desk, we answer their questions, we take their calls as librarians. We help them find the right book on the shelf. If we could put that system, if we could put that information into our system as part of our description, as part of our access information, so that when a person self-identified in our discovery interface that they were the mom of a K-12 student that was bringing her son here for tutoring, we could force a display of the right information at the right time against what that student was learning. And we could do it all just by information that we either had about them or that they provided to us to get added services. And all of this then, if we took access and description to mean these things, drives engagement, impact, and delivery of the right resource to the right person at the right time in the desired form. That would be so much better than known item search, because that's what our users want. They want the right thing to teach them what they need to know at the right time. And that is person, form, and format sensitive. So RDA starts the journey, but it doesn't take us far enough. Which then brings me to my next slide. Before we go any further, I wanted to pause again for thoughts and questions about the part of the solution RDA does provide and where and how it feels too constraining or needs extension for what your use cases are today in library.
There was a comment from Eva, looking at it very pragmatically, I think as a lot of librarians look, that this is a fine model, but what are the practical repercussions of this model for librarians?
I think of the BibFrame model.
She wasn't specific. This was a little bit ago, so within this last section. Yeah.
I think the practical repercussions, just some of them that I know of, are one, we have reduced budgets. We've already experienced downsizing of our cataloging departments, so we have to do more with less. Doing more with less, with more efficiency that keeps us funded, means connecting better with the life cycles that we are a part of instead of staying in our silo. So that's what these models do. They're from those areas. It doesn't mean we have some learning and training to do, certainly. And we see that today coming out of our MLIS schools. The training that's happening today is very different than the training that we would have seen just 10 years ago. The job descriptions in metadata, if you watch them, are becoming very different. So I think it's a point of strain and learning and a mix of generations and job descriptions coming into our libraries. Maybe that doesn't fully answer the question as a one-to-one granularity, but these questions are big. They aren't one-to-one granularity. This isn't just about changing a cataloging standard or escaping an encoding system. It's about leapfrogging from some very dated technology with some really good things in it to what we need to have today to be able to meet the needs of our users and our institutions and our communities in an economical fashion, I think. Maybe I'm oversimplifying or stating the business case, but that's just sort of how my head works in an evidence-based world.
Sure, and then a follow-up from Eva. Yes, we want to do more with less. What do we do first? How do we work now with our MARC-based systems and with the RDA overlay to enable access in the future?
Oh, I have that in the basic principles. So good, I'm in the right place. So maybe I just need to keep moving. Are there other questions?
Nannette, this is Ann here. Let's see. Katie asked the question on how does one develop use cases to determine what our users actually want or need? If they're going to be evidence-based, how do they acquire the evidence?
So I have 3 answers to that. The first answer might seem like a shameless plug, but it's not. It's these hot topics. Watch Rebecca Blankston's usability testing. That's exactly what that's focused on. And Anne, I think that is repeated and then also extends later in the year. So really, how do we get into user experience? And at the beginning of that, she gives some great resources on just how to do that, and then she gives live examples from how Arizona is doing that. The second piece, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, yes.
The second piece is watch Berend Becker's digital literacy. It's another hot topic. He's from SJSU. That's actually where I pulled the makerspace piece and how he's facilitating that. It's an academic, but it is very public accessible. And it taught me so much about the dual problem of helping our users and getting the use cases. First, they need to be literate and they need to understand the information. Then they also need to understand how to access that information through their tool. So user experience, usability testing, digital literacy, and then I'm going to give you tips at the end of this in the basic principles because I know folks needed a takeaway. Those tips we'll pick up and put examples on in session 2. So hopefully we give you 3 recorded sets with lots of resources in all 3 for continued learning. And then I'm sure somebody would slap my hand here if I didn't say, because we have a lot of customers on the line, that's also what we should be able to help you with in consulting. Things like workflow management, link data, those pieces, you should be able to call on us, and we should be able to help you there as well if you want some outside help.
And before we move on, though, Beth makes a point that I think is going to be addressed in our session on the 20th. Beth points out that a big problem that has not been addressed is in identifying resources for patrons, which is a critical issue, and it's often tied to the level of sophistication of the resource. Is it too technical? Is it too detailed? How can the system help to identify the appropriate readiness of the resource for the particular user? Again, I think that's something that we'll possibly address later.
It's a great question. I can tell you that it's being addressed in our development of our new discovery interface and our next generation products here. So was it Beth you said, Anne?
Yes, it was Beth.
Specifically, if you want to drop us an email, Beth, I'll put you in touch with my counterpart, Aaron, because one of the things he's working on now is reading level and those other assessments to make sure that we have a browse, if you will, that is patron appropriate so that when we have a K-12 kid coming in, we're not shoving them PhD level information versus when we have an advanced fourth year student coming in, we're not shoving them what we fed to high schoolers and freshmen. We're sending them to the research articles and other part that they need to continue their learning journey. Hopefully that starts to answer the question.
Okay, and that was all I had. Those came through.
All right. So I'll go on to the next myth then. Of course, if MARC is the problem and RDA is the solution, then aren't we all hearing about this magic black box that solves all our problems with precision and speed in context, and isn't that linked data? My answer to that is not quite. Right, we all know this already probably. But what linked data does for us is it breaks down those silos. It starts to demolish the silos that we've been in by publishing and opening our information to larger audiences in a format that they can consume. So it's kind of like these guys at the bottom of the slide walking between the silos, because right now it's still MARC. So right now, even BibFrame 2.0 is still pretty marky. It has value, and we're doing things and we're building bridges that can help us, but it's not, right, the magic black box. So the biggest part I think about, because people are asking questions here, the biggest part I think about here is those relationships that come from RDA, the relator terms in MARC, and how that plays out into linked data, and the connections that we have in MARC and RDA between the bibliographic record and the authorities that we have. Those are the places, right, that we're starting to build bridges. Those are bridges of meaning that are extensible, that benefit from all of those love notes we left, and get us out of the silo, building bridges faster while we continue to take the next step, right? Because linked data, as we all know, isn't as easy as it seems. It's a bit like this picture on the bottom, which is actually mutton busting, right? This is how kids start riding bulls. I did say I live on a ranch. They're dreaming, as in this picture, of riding the big bull in the big show. But reality is we have to start somewhere, and we start with something smaller that we can control, that we understand. That's a big part of evidence-based moving forward. And so I pull us back to relator terms, relationships, and authorities connections, because we understand those. We understand those well, and we're focused on areas of value, like riding the sheep, staying on a moving object very fast that jumps up and down. Those small areas help us to do this, while acknowledging it's still MARC. Linked data today is still MARC. It's still search engine optimization, very valuable. That's where it stands today. And it helps us hone our skills in those areas, and it helps us connect what we know to the digital lives of our users. The Severe solution that we have here at IIII is just one of the solutions, but we partner with them, and it has a very robust analytics section. What I'm finding very interesting about that is it's telling me how my users behave. It's feeding me information against the parts that I know, against my catalog, that starts to help me build those use cases we were talking about, while also getting me out of my silo and bringing people into my library. But what we need moving forward, and where we're going with next generation, is we need to go one step farther than that. We need to make it not such a rough ride that takes so much work. We need to make it a speed and precision event. In show jumping, in context, this isn't a steeplechase. This is obviously in a controlled arena. There's finesse and training involved. And a lot of teamwork required to get here and win. And I think that's where we're going in the next, I know that's where we're going in the next generation, both internally at IIII and in the next generation of linked data and the next generation of BibFrame. If you listen to those BibFrame presentations, and they make them all available, you can see they have some very focused use cases underneath there. And that LD4P group is talking about some very focused things. And they're talking about knowledge as a performance. And how do we make those things we have in our collections more accessible to the research and learning journeys. So we probably don't have a lot of questions here because I'm throwing a lot of information at you, but I will pause for just a second to see if anything's come in. And I'll dive straight into the next slide. You know, this one might seem a little self-serving, but I was on enough RDA committees and sitting in the room long enough before I worked in a vendor to hear this a lot. The myth being that the vendors have all the answers and linked data is just a checkbox. The reality is together everyone achieves more. Teamwork is indeed required. The specialists about any given resource type and about your use cases live in your libraries. The systems people, the technologists that help you connect those dots live at your vendors. And so we need to do just as we're talking about. We need to get out there and do our usability testing. We need to bring you into the fold with other groups. We need to help you tell us what you need on the street. And so I just wanted to put a plug in for partnership. I am here at IIII a relatively new hire in that I haven't been here a full year yet, but I'm here for the partnership opportunities, and I find that very unique at III. So I hope you take advantage of it. The hot topics, the accessibility, the fact that the account reps are now ready to start talking to you about this as well. Take us seriously and hold us accountable. So on to part 2, basic principles of metadata modernization. I'm going to start with the T-shirt. I'm a developer. You're probably tired of hearing me say that. I'm sure I've crossed the threshold of saying evidence at least 7 times. But this really is about following the evidence, not just the standards. And as we follow that evidence, it will lead us out of our delusions. I'll be honest, one of my delusions I showed you earlier in the slide, early in this presentation. When I came in to RDA, I thought carrier type solved it all, right? I really believed the RDA pieces that we were talking about. Following the evidence of what it doesn't deliver through our systems over the last few years is what's gotten me to here today, what we presented, and following more of those pieces will get us there faster. One of that I'm following now is integration with Overdrive, which we will talk about more next week. So what's the first principle? Start with the knowns. Define your box. I know everybody always says think outside the box. Not yet. We need to start with what we know, or maybe better said is we need to start with what we should know. Those are the outlines of what we can build. What are those questions that we need to ask ourselves as we look at this? Before we look at a system, before we define what we're modernizing, we need to understand our institutional alignment needs. What are we doing, for whom, and why? We need to understand the flow of the resources and services and the programs that we provide to our constituencies through our library, as well as the flow of our metadata. Although for use cases, that first piece is the important part, right? You can let the geeks and the technologists think about the other stuff, but you have to understand from a use case perspective, how is all this flowing through our library? Why is it flowing through our library? Who's using it for what purpose? And then finally, what are our policies surrounding that? Hopefully this starts to put some concrete bones on the questions that have been asked. And Bill and Ann, maybe I'll pause here to see if you think this is clear enough and starting to put those principles together.
Yeah, I think it is. This is Ann, of course, here. It is interesting to define your box because, as you said earlier, we're so accustomed to trying to think outside of the box as we try to meet the needs of the patron population, our funders, and others that, as librarians, we're responsible for in getting our information out. So, yeah, it's making sense.
Good. All right, so the next principle then is outline what you do and why. We need a detail of the current state, not an over detail. We just need to understand what we do and why we do it in a way that's helpful and not constraining or time consuming, right? So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about agility, and I'm not going to tell you to go learn the Agile software process. So if you want to and you have those questions, I'll point you to a great book. Really, what I'm talking about is what's driving your current state? You know, what does it drive for your users, in your system, and at your institution? And I want you to think about your hopes and dreams against use cases. So not like we got into this with all of our myths that Sally Cataloger sits down to her terminal and she keys in the following in MARC. That's not really a use case. Maybe I have an Overdrive license, and my new Overdrive license allows me to move titles in and out based on usage on a quarterly basis. I need to do that to optimize my license because I'm in a public library, and certain portions of my branches, the constituencies are changing greatly as one area gentrifies and as new immigrants come into another area, or new immigrants to our city, or we built a plant there because I was just in Austin because Amazon's coming. There are many things that change our constituencies. Looking at optimizing and changing our resources, especially our electronic resources, against our licenses and how MARC does or doesn't serve that. Right now, by the way, we serve that in most systems with a sub record. that would be nice to have more complete information to deliver to discovery, and more complete information, of course, over time. That's a use case. And I'm telling you why I'm doing it and what I'm doing. So I want to optimize my license to have the right titles in that mix at any time because I've spent a lot of time negotiating this license. I need to adjust my sub-records in a way that increases their value over time but still allows me to deliver immediately upon the changes in my collection through my catalog and discovery interfaces. We'll pick that one up again next week. It's one of, or in 2 weeks, excuse me. It's one of the examples, but I wanted to give you some concrete, right? Can you hear the difference between Sally catalog or Sally use case, what I do and why, which is very concrete, versus this is what I'm trying to do and why and what I want to accomplish. So, but then I want to also give shape to my dreams. And I, as a former athlete and as someone who rides horses, as you'll see in a minute and probably have already guessed, I like guided imagery. I really got into this when I took a bad fall and suddenly experienced fear, right? That horse was suddenly very tall when I had to go. So what I did was I gave shape to my dreams to be able to ride up the side of a mountain again by guided imagery, knowing what I wanted to achieve and imagining myself through that process and iterating through in my imagination until I got to where I could achieve it. I got to where I could state use cases. So again, this is what would guided imagery be in library today, in evidence-based metadata modernization. Wow, I created a tongue twister for myself. I think guided imagery should be about impact. What does impact look like to you? What does it mean to impact your users? What does it mean to engage the patrons that come into your library every day? And what do modernized or better user experiences look like for your patrons and students in the library and online? Sometimes that involves watching them, as we see in the usability test, but often it just involves thinking about why we became a librarian, why are we in library, and what is that we hope to accomplish in aiding them. I think my guided imagery, you probably hear that. It goes in facilitating inquiry, facilitating research, learning, and digital literacy. Each librarian and librarian probably have others. We have some commonalities, but we would have different. And as a technologist, mine are probably very different than a librarian proper. Principle 4, evidence basis, right? What does that mean? I think that means things like cost of ownership. What is it costing me to own my current systems or new systems? In opportunities, you'll see that was weaved through the conversation today. You'll see that more tomorrow. In terms of money, in the short term, in the intermediate and longer term. MARC's very expensive today because of all the labor that we have to put in it, but it's also opportunity cost heavy in a discovery interface because of all the opportunities we might lose for what we don't display correctly or what we give in a format that the user doesn't understand, like that carrier type example. I've said it ridiculous amount of times, speed and precision. It's all about speed and precision at speed with context. The right thing to the right user at the right time with minimal delay. Users don't wait. They click and go someplace else. Users don't click 3 times. If they don't get what they wanted, beyond that, they leave and go someplace else and start over. It also means, of course, interoperability and extensibility. And of course, as this slide shows, I have a metaphor for this. Basically, we start small with a beginner's horse to learn the details. Those details, hopefully we're starting to outline, they're authorities, connections between bibs and authorities that give meaning over time. That contributes to the way people research and the way people learn. Go back to our early texts of librarianship knowledge organization and what we do for the services we provide for people. I had another connection. The authorities, the relator terms and the relationships. Who created it? Why they created it? This piece I listened to, what's the score for it? Oh, this score is in this music performed, or in this theatrical version of this movie performed by this person. That's sort of following the evidence. And once we do that, and as we learn, we're going to move up to this next one that you see over here, which is an intermediate horse. She's been there, she's done that, but her cost of ownership is really high. My point is that's where linked data is today. She's been there, she's done that. She's teaching us a lot of things that are very important. She's helping us with our basic business cases, but her cost of ownership is kind of high. And because it's high and because we're following the evidence, we know we need to move on to the next thing and on to the next level with speed and regularity. For some of you on the phone, I'm probably not telling you anything that you don't know. I've been talking to a lot of customers about these areas, and that's what they're telling us. And I want you to know we heard, and we're moving forward with these pieces, both helping you in the beginning and with your intermediate horse and getting the most out of it and taking it to the next step when and if you're ready for more. And my last principle for today is user-focused design. Right, this is in our systems talking about personas, talking about them as real people and real pictures so that we are looking at things like usability, engagement, and impact against the knowledge enablement tasks that people come to our libraries and catalogs and our metadata and our systems to do, which include learning, inquiry, literacy, research. And I want to add one I haven't talked about much today, but that is actually vital and that I think we need to introduce more into the conversation, which is enjoyment and entertainment. We get a lot of engagement through that. Enjoyment and entertainment, especially in a world of gamification of life, librarians know better than anybody, those feed into learning, inquiry, literacy, and research as well. And so as we look at our user-focused design, we need to think about those things and how they impact the use cases maybe that we see from something like a UNO, which is about a high-end researcher. Maybe we need to excerpt that a little bit more and start looking at enjoyment and entertainment and how that increases and interacts with those pieces. So that's actually what I have for you today. I don't know how I am on time. Oh, pretty good. We're just down to about 15 minutes. What I wanted to do was come back at the end and see, I've thrown a lot at you, those basic principles that I went through very fast are the basis of part 2, where we talk about how to start implementing this in your library and setting a future for your metadata modernization moving forward. So feel free to chat a topic you want to make sure we cover next time, something that we didn't cover today that you, or a new question that you thought about as we went through this.
Well, thanks, Nannette. I'm sure Bill's looking in the chat window trying to see the thoughts and comments. And I think we kept up to date with most of the chats that came through because I know we had a series that, it was interesting watching the chat because a lot of your thoughts presented thought about multiple questions within a question. So, again, there's a lot of information being thrown at us, but I think it's extremely useful, and I think that they found it to be such. And we'll be back on the 20th with more questions because they will leave with visions of metadata modernization dancing in their heads. So I think that'll be good, and we'll have lots of questions coming forward.
It was a question from Martin that just came through. We'd really like to see about development of bib frame interfaces by Innovative. We'd really like to see about development of bib frame interfaces by Innovative.
That is a great question and something that we're working on now. While I can't bring that to you in 2 weeks, I should be able to bring you, and that won't be in our midwinter pieces, we should be able to bring you some of those pieces towards the middle of this year.
Okay. And Martin says thank you.
And I have nothing on this end, and that.
I have a question. It looks like we have a whole bunch coming in.
When is the new discovery layer? Sorry. When is the new discovery layer going to be out? What's the time frame for?
I don't have an official date, but I do know that we're showing the clickable prototype and doing our usability testing over the next couple of months. And you should certainly watch for definitive answers coming out over the next 3 months. I know that Harnish has done some presentations on this and that there are presentations in process. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head what the answer was with the account reps, but I will make sure we come back in 2 weeks and have a more definitive answer. It's just my limitation and my brain being too small to process all the information.
Sure. And there's another question from Barbara, comment. As a private institution not open to the public, there is considerable reluctance to direct our very limited staff and financial resources to something that is seen as a way to make your holdings accessible publicly on the web. I need some arguments why this is still a good thing, even internally, for a library that doesn't do a lot of resource sharing. She's looking for arguments to still do some of these initiatives, even though they're not really sharing outside of their institution.
I totally agree with you, Barbara. That has been way too much of the focus, and we're working on those right now. The short answer is that we're trying to provide you some in streamlining and cost savings so that you have metadata that is more directed to your specific institution's needs and those of your users at the lowest cost possible. So I think it's about workflow streamlining, but that's where we're working. I don't have all the details, and certainly too much of the linked data conversation has been about push it out to Google. So we're closing that loop, I guess, is the best answer I have at the moment.
And then Eva asked, and I'm not sure that you'll be able to answer this because it's probably a sales question, but will Encore users get the new discovery interface automatically?
I don't have that answer. That is a sales question. I would ask your account reps. Yeah, that's sounds like I'm passing the buck. I'm not. I just happen to be a product person, and I happen to be the metadata product person, not the discovery product person. And I pushed the envelope a little bit by having Aaron give me a few shots to put in this set. I will also have a few shots in the next session as well. So I'd say account rep is your best way to get that answer.
And then Martin asked to follow up, by discovery interface, do you mean the context navigator or new discovery layer? Yes, I believe that's the answer to that is yes.
Okay.
From Katie, a lot of your basic principles seem institution level and apply to far more than metadata, very big picture. How can an individual cataloger viewing this webinar start to engage the decision makers in their library who may not see metadata modernization as a priority?
That is a good question. And I will take that to next week and at minimum have a slide that has a list of resources and places to start plugging into the conversation.
And Eva just replied to the earlier question. I guess we're just concerned about how to prepare for all this budget-wise and also with what foundational data we need for it, AG, BibFrame, et cetera. I've already asked our account manager, and he pointed me to this presentation.
Uh-oh, an infinite loop.
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry you got the infinite loop. This presentation is the start. And I know that we are working on, and as I said, I'll bring the one slide in, at least one slide in 2 weeks. You should see more rolling out from us on a regular basis along these lines. While I didn't mention it today, we also have a new leadership in marketing focused on some of these issues, and my position here is new. So the senior product manager for metadata not being attached to any single product like Sky River is new, and this is one of the things I'm trying to address. I admit I've been here in this position, I might be 8 weeks now, 9 weeks. Christmas was in the middle of that. So if you have ideas and needs on this, please don't be shy, share them. But that's sort of the heart of my work at the moment. Well, my work at the moment is run to catch up and see where we are and what your most important use cases are. And then from there, how do we help you make this transition? I also, I think Martha Sanders is on, Ann is here, and Bill is here, and I know that our support and training division plays a role in this as well. And what I can tell you is we're talking, right, guys?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We're talking and we're planning exactly how we are going to meet the needs of innovative customers, regardless of platform. We're looking at and putting things in place. And these hot topics, it's interesting that Ava was pointed to this discussion about that, because these hot topics are some of the examples of how we're trying to get that information out to our customers, because it is something that affects not just innovative customers, but this is something that is very deep within the library community as a whole. Anything else, Bill?
No, just that a little more sound issues that Ava couldn't hear a response. But
oh, bummer. All right. So as we wrap up, we do want to just remind you that we do these hot topic presentations monthly, and several of the topics that and content that Nannette mentioned in her presentation are actually already on our hot topic calendar. You know, for example, we do have an upcoming hot topic on digital literacy, and this is going to be presenting and teaching those skills that impact your student success, inquiry, and knowledge enablement. And every patron-facing librarian in a public or an academic library, they're already teaching it daily, but we will have an outside presenter bringing us key points on that. We have, as libraries undergo change, such as the ones that this metadata modernization is going to bring to you. We have mindful leadership hot topic, which is where you can come and hear about the new management skills, or they're not new, but management skills that will work for you as your librarians, that help you to deal with your patrons, the people who are the sources of your funds, as well as your library supporters. Nannette mentioned our usability study. This essential skill is beyond the ILS, but it helps us to create and design digital suites that are going to engage our patrons and end users where they are daily. A large part of what Nannette presented to us today, where we can meet our users where they are, online, in your library's learning management system, on their phones, on their tablets. Yeah, we're going with the engagement basics, usability basics, you'll be able to get tips on meeting your patrons where they are. We also have an upcoming hot topic on project management. How is all of this going to fit together? Come and hear about the survival skills that you're going to need to ensure that you get some ideas and tips on how you might secure funding, how you might teach, and basically outline any project that you might have ongoing in your library. In addition to our monthly webinars, Martha Rice Sanders and I will be at the IUG conference in Orlando later this spring, I believe in April, and we'll have many sessions on knowledge economy and a basic general overview of metadata. So if you have not signed up for those free conferences, or you know someone who might just need the basics, we had a question on how are you going to get the message out about metadata modernization to other people in your library. The IUG free conferences might be one way that you might do that. Now, speaking of Martha Rice Sanders, we also have the opportunities available for you online to dig a little bit deeper in what we're calling our boot camp series, where we're taking A lot of the topics that we may have presented here in the hot topics, but we're taking them to that next level. As Nannette was emphasizing, she's giving you a general overview of some of the metadata considerations. But our boot camps are designed to dig just a little bit deeper, and we're actually starting one, and we have one upcoming just next month, on cataloging essentials. It's going to be presented by Martha Rice Sanders, and it's being built, and Martha has designed it for what she's calling the accidental cataloger. What are the skills and such that you need to know about what you're presently working with as you prepare to move forward? We also have designed, and we'll be presenting boot camps, rather, in the areas of library leadership. We have more information about content and library metadata management. Those will be coming in the summer, and then we'll do a full knowledge economy boot camp later on in the fall. Our schedule is being updated on a regular basis, so do continue to watch our website for the latest and greatest announcements. If you have not subscribed to Innovative's blog spot or the ability to receive Innovative's updates, you can do that as well, all on our corporate website. All of our hot topics, boot camps, and workshops can be done and registered online. There, off of our corporate website, you'll be able to register for both presentations of a hot topic. You'll be able to explore and see what's going to actually be covered during our boot camp session. And the beauty about our boot camps, I think, is that you can take the complete camp or you can sign up for individual sessions. But do take the chance to go ahead and look at what we're beginning to offer as we take our information beyond the ILS and continue our partnership with you and getting you the tools and the resources that you will need to move your library forward. You like what you have seen? We're going to appreciate your feedback at the end of, well, it's in a couple of days, not at the end of, but you will be receiving a brief survey that we would hope you take the opportunity to complete and tell us what you thought about today's session. Give us some suggestions on things that you would like to see if Innovative can bring to you in this series. Tell us what you need. We'll try to address that need as best we can, and invite us into your library. Bill, Martha Rice Sanders, and I, as well as the whole team of Innovative Library Training Consultants, are here to help you in any way that we can adjust your workflow, your system needs, both in and outside of the ILS. We do appreciate your joining us today. We hope to see all of you back in 2 weeks. We're skipping next week. We're back on February 20th with Nannette, where she will continue today's topic on metadata modernization, essential knowledge that you're going to need, that we're all going to need as we go about our knowledge engagement and we master our knowledge enablement skills. So we thank you for your participation, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the conference call for today. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect your line.